Hey,
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
hi
Thanks for
everyone.
coming. Um,
Guys, that was amazing.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
To everybody that's on, thank you for coming. This is Jake Olson, the musical composer of the film, and he's also, as you probably saw, a participant and interviewee, and he's going to be moderating the panel today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys. That was phenomenal. Maybe let's start out with some intros. Can each of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your involvement in the project?
Sure. My name is Danielle Shelley-Levy. I am a co-director and a multidisciplinary director and producer. I come from a lot of live work and digital media.
I'm Reed Hannaford, co-director. I'm a filmmaker and artist from Canada, based in New York City with a background in narrative.
And I'm Arthur Choi. I'm a co-creator and product lead. I'm an entrepreneur from Korea, currently based in New York City, and currently working at an AI health technology company.
Fantastic. Well, thank you guys for this Q&A. This is awesome. So this film uniquely exists on the medium of the internet in a web browser. Can you tell us about the path making this choice and the motivations behind it?
Sure, yeah. Accessibility has been a really important part of this project from the very beginning. We cared a lot about accessing global audiences, and especially people who don't necessarily exist in the technology space. So creating something browser-based felt incredibly accessible for the audience we were trying to reach, more so than VR might have been, for example. That was incredibly enticing. And then developing this project during the pandemic, browser-based became more and more compelling, as well as interactive, as a way to kind of democratize access to the conversation around artificial intelligence and connect to more people all over the world.
We also were cognizant of the fact that people are often interacting with artificial intelligence through their devices, through their phones, through their computers, and we wanted to tie that into the experience itself.
That's awesome. And you know, there's such a collection of voices in this project. How did you guys arrive at the collective portrait as a format? And then what was the process like finding all these amazing folks?
Yeah, well, similar to it being browser-based, again, accessibility and the democratization of the conversation was super important. So when thinking about what a collective portrait could mean and look like, I come from media and anthropology, and creating something that felt ethnographic of this moment with artificial intelligence, something that really showed what the current temperature was like. If we took the temperature from all of these people in our extended community and our extended community's extended community and continued to grow that further and further, which is really how we found the voices in Mimic, we felt like it would be a really great way to make something for everyday people about artificial intelligence rather than making something educational about artificial intelligence. That was really what was most on our minds when shaping the format.
That's awesome. And I love all the iPhone footage that you guys got from captured by real people. It brings like a raw and intimate kind of intimacy to the film. How did you land there opposed to shooting footage yourselves?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really special part of the piece for us as well. You know, a lot of what you hear in Mimic is about people's personal relationships to their technology and their devices. And when thinking about iPhone footage and just or cell phone footage, it's you have a really personal relationship to your device. And then that is kind of the lens within which you access the outside world, whether it's what you're reading on your phone or how you're documenting things. So when wanting to show what our most intimate relationships are with our devices and with artificial intelligence, it felt like the most organic and intuitive and authentic way to really do that was to, rather than shooting things ourselves. I mean, some of the cell phone footage is from our phones, but we also collectively sourced it the same way that we sourced a lot of the interviewees that you see who are everyday users and not just experts. So it was really, I think that was a very big part of the what. And then we thought that it would create really great moments of pause and meditation as you're digesting all of these different opinions and voices that are a part of the conversation.
Lovely. Yeah, no, again, watching it today, it almost felt like seeing what, if the computer was alive, what their perspective would be of us through cell phone cameras and everything. And it was kind of a interesting feeling amongst other things.
I'm
So
glad
what were what's that?
I'm glad it resonated.
Oh, for sure. So what were the original goals that you guys had when you first set out, and how did they change over the past 8 months that you've all been working on this project for in the lab?
It's a good question. The project has changed, as everyone who's in this call right now from the lab can say. The project has changed immensely since we started 8 months ago at the beginning of the lab. For anyone unaware, this project was developed as part of CPH Lab, which is a development program designed to help artists explore the boundaries of what documentary film can be. And so, I mean, Danielle kind of covered this in another question, but we started out really trying to make a film about AI. And as we iterated and evolved and got feedback from the mentor team at CPH, and as we started to interview and talk to people, we realized it was much more compelling to tell a story about how we feel about AI. And that it was a much more human-centric approach to exploring these themes and these questions. I'd say that's probably the biggest thematic shift that went on. And then of course there were lots of development changes, and the experience itself is a little different from what we originally envisioned. But the core, I think, has maintained its identity throughout the whole process, and I'm really proud of that.
Amazing. And all of you have spent an immense amount of time speaking to each of the subjects and research on AI over the past few months. How have your own views changed on artificial intelligence since you first started the project?
Yeah, I think for the rest of the team, I think AI as a concept became a little more tangible. When AI is something that is so ubiquitous, but not a lot of people think about it or picture it. Just looking at sequence 1 of our film. For me specifically, I work in the industry, so it was a little more tangible, but being able to see and hear about how AI is impacting the broader society. It's very easy to think about AI in a very siloed kind of manner when you're in the industry. And so being able to see how it impacts the human side, I think that was something that really was enlightening for me.
Awesome. And Reed and Danielle, how did your views change on artificial intelligence through this process?
Yeah, I think Arthur, what you said resonates with me as well. It became much more tangible. It went from being something really high concept and intellectualized to something that I can actually really understand, like, what it is. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep neural networks, these are all kind of buzzwords a lot of the time. And I learned an immense amount about AI, just obviously from having all these wonderful conversations with people, and also just learning about what the general public thinks AI is and how they feel about it was also really eye-opening.
Yeah, I mean, to echo what both Reed and Arthur said, I think it became much more tangible and not this like subliminal black box that it also very much is. And talking to so many different people really helped me kind of develop a more balanced relationship. We try as hard as we can be to stay neutral in these interviews, but it is shaping our relationship to AI kind of in the background. We've definitely debriefed after interviews, and I've left some feeling more optimistic and some feeling more skeptical. And I think it just kind of, the scale was constantly tipping for me as I had all of these conversations. But at the end of the day, I think it made me much more positive and hopeful about the future that artificial intelligence can bring, as so long as we're being cognizant about who's in the room and who's creating these algorithms.
That's so important. And Arthur, would you say you were surprised or kind of not surprised by getting the public opinion and thoughts on artificial intelligence, having seen all these interviews?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there were some really surprising moments where people had thought really deeply about how AI does affect their lives. I mean, like everyday users interact with AI all the time. I mean, we're all everyday users at the end, but really kind of like the personal relationships that they developed with the AI that they interact with was really cool to see. there's a moment where it's about like how people anthropomorphize AI. That was quite interesting for me.
I also, a lot of people that we interviewed, particularly the non-AI experts, a lot of people were sort of confused as to, they were like, oh, why do you want to interview me? And it was really special actually to talk to them and to have them realize that they had something to add, even if they weren't experts in the field. And getting that insight, I think was just a really special part of the experience.
It really, and I should add, it really, really shaped our input points. Like the input points, like the way that we phrased the questions, and some that were yes or no, and some that were written, and how much time we gave to them. I mean, that kind of like preliminary focus group testing on those questions almost came from conducting these interviews, especially with people who are everyday users and were maybe surprised that they were being asked to contribute to this conversation, because we are trying to broker a more accessible dialogue. And I think we got to feel out what questions are more accessible and which questions aren't. And it really shaped a lot of the interactivity that you saw today by having those conversations.
How would you say initially when you first started out with those input points, they diverted the most? Were there certain questions where like, oh, of course we need to add this that we didn't see before, or which parts of the doc? Yeah.
The one I love is that, like, I think, I remember sitting on this couch with Reed and like trying to figure out what the first question should be. And then I said like, oh, it should obviously be, what do you picture when you think about artificial intelligence? And then we started asking that, and then no one was saying what they visualized. So then we had to change the question to, what do you visualize when you think about artificial intelligence? So sometimes it's like semantics and it's stuff like that. And then other times it was just realizing that some questions were maybe too cerebral or too dense to be responded to in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yet we still have what makes us human. I think, you should really speak to that.
We're very cognizant of the fact that 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 90 seconds is not enough time to answer most of these questions, especially when you're looking at them for the very first time and you don't have like an answer in your head already. It's sort of the nature of keeping a premiere on schedule, and we're gonna expand the times on the input points after this, because these are big questions and not questions with easy answers.
For sure. It definitely gets your heart pumping though when you see the timer getting lower and lower, and you're like, oh my God, what makes us human? Gotta figure it out.
Doesn't everybody
1 minute
have a quick answer for that?
Yeah, something on hand, pocket answer.
Yeah.
You really do have to distill it down into it, like your thoughts and your perspective to its essence in a very short period of time. But I kind of like that about it too. It's not often that you're given like a time scale or like a window of time for questions like that. One of the sentiments that I loved in the doc, which I don't think we realized too, is like, maybe this is riffing off your point, Arthur, but we overestimate technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. I hadn't thought about it that way. And I'm just curious about how, if there are any points through the process of the doc, whether they're in the film itself or not in the film, that resonated with each of you, that you're like, wow, I never thought about it like that.
You want to take?
Yeah, sure. There were a lot of moments with our interviewees that we were like, this is so golden, but we couldn't include it, and we wish we had more sequences to explore all these themes. But it was kind of like the blurring of lines. AI, because AI is such a cerebral concept for a lot of people, a lot of interviewees kind of talked about it with the everyday technologies that they use in their lives, not necessarily explicit to AI and what that does. And so that I think that blurring of lines is really telling of how influential AI is and how well integrated. Yeah, well integrated it is to our lives, and that we don't even think about it when we're using AI and interacting with these algorithms. I think that was really special to see.
We also had a lot of great material about consumerism and corporatism and targeted advertising and just politics and stuff that we ended up having to not include in the premiere, just to keep things on task and reduce the amount of threads that we were covering. But I think we probably could have created like an hour-long doc with all of the material that we had, and it was really challenging to figure out what was really the most compelling material and how to cull that down into something a little bit more comprehensive.
Yeah. What I loved too about the interview process, we had this lightning round where, and Jake, we asked you this when we interviewed you too, like questions like, would you rather trust a friend or an algorithm to make you a playlist? Would you rather trust a doctor or an algorithm to diagnose you with an illness? Would you rather trust, a friend or an algorithm to set you up on a blind date? And going through that lightning round and having people rationalize, like with the current status of algorithms and friends and critics and doctors and, all of the, non-algorithm counterweights to that, asking them to kind of rationalize why they chose what they chose, pulled out a lot of really interesting relationships to what we think algorithms are and what we think the other kind of selection models and suggestion models in our life that are maybe more analog give us. It laid bare a lot of things that right now people think algorithms can't ever replicate. And it opened up a lot of questions about if they eventually can, or what is uniquely human. I think it actually ended up leading us to that question about what makes us human in some ways, just by having to make yes or no answer.
Yeah, 100%. So really quick before I open it up to the audience for questions, if anyone in the audience has a question, please write it out in the chat and we'll turn your video camera on if you'd like to come on. And yeah, but before that, what's next for you guys?
We're incredibly excited about what could be next. Like we mentioned, this is the first prototype and mimics an evolving conversation. Our relationship to AI is one that will continue to evolve and evolve and evolve. We're really interested in what can happen when we explore branching narratives. Like Reed and Arthur mentioned, so much got left on the cutting room floor, and we want to interview only more and more people. So the interactivity opportunities with branching narratives is incredibly enticing. Doing things where we actually implement algorithms to create live generative visuals and AI becomes a media, like part of the medium and not just the message. I think that's super exciting for us to think about. And really more than anything, and I think this is a little bit of reaction to the pandemic, but also just a reaction to making a first iteration. We're so excited at what can happen when you bring this into a physical installation. What new connections can be made between people? What does a collective portrait mean when you get to have it exist in a collective space in a public environment? And what does editing look like? We edited this, but what does editing look like when the viewer gets to self-edit because they're meandering through an installation where they're moving from point to point and engaging with different videos and interviews and more tangible even components. So there's a lot of translation that can occur that can create what Mimic is and how to access this conversation and make it even more accessible and to more people. So there's a lot we're excited to explore.
Amazing. So bring it perhaps from the web browser to reality in a physical installation would be incredible. I love that. Awesome. Yeah, fingers crossed. Okay, cool. So I'm going to open up for questions. Here we have one from Donna. I'm not sure if it makes sense to put Donna's camera on or I could just read out the question. Here it's, what does the title refer to? Mimic.
Take this, Daniel?
Sure. You were in the room when the title was conceived, but I think, I'll just chime in a little bit. Like a lot of it's about, well, it's funny, in so many interviews, people ended up using the word mimic frequently when they were describing what artificial intelligence is trying to do. Is it trying to mimic human behavior and human decision making? How close to replicating human tendency and rationalization can it get? What is mimicry? And I also think, you have this relationship with your own self-reflection in so many ways through these personalized algorithms and suggestion models where you're seeing yourself reflected back to you. So it's not just about mimicking human behavior, but it's in some ways, these algorithms are attempting to replicate yourself. What is self-portraiture through the lens of an algorithm? So I think mimicry shows up in a lot of ways. And it's funny, we came up with Mimic very early on. Our friend Daniel came up with it very early on in the process. And it's just stuck. It's worked with every evolving approach to this project. But yeah, I think that's a bit about Mimic.
It's very fitting. All right, and this one's from Jack. How do you envision the user inputs being incorporated in future iterations of the project, if at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we really, in a future version of Mimic, where we have more time, more resources, more development, we would love to make the project dynamic and make the user the audience experiencing the project a more direct participant in what they're watching, right? So branching narratives are something that we're really, really interested in exploring, right? Where user input actually dictates what you see on screen, which path you end up going on, which threads you follow, being directly tied to how you're answering questions throughout the experience. That I think would be the first thing that we want to implement. And then, of course, it depends if we end up doing a physical installation, that would change as well. But that's the number one thing that I'd be really, really excited to incorporate.
Awesome. And this is from Sherry here. Can you speak to the genesis and initiating impulse of creating this work? So maybe you could tell us a little bit about CPH docs, how you guys got in contact with them, how you all met each other initially, and why AI out of all the different subjects that could have been chosen.
Yeah, I mean, I can start with how we came together, and then I think, I'll pass off some of it to both of you. But I mean, Reed and Arthur are childhood friends. They grew up together in Canada. And Reed and I we've all kind of orbited each other for a while. And Reed and I have wanted to work together on a project, just the two of us. We've co-produced a lot of other projects for friends and just worked on a lot of things in film, but had both been interested in emerging media and interactive storytelling and documentary, and hadn't really had the opportunity yet to do something together. So this was an incredibly exciting way to do it. I mean, Reed and Arthur were starting to work on the application, and Reed contacted me and asked me to review it and give him my thoughts. And I only found out halfway through that conversation that he was planning on asking me to join the team and just didn't lead with that. So I came on while they were in the application phase, and we really shaped it from there. But yeah, I mean, they knew very early on that AI was something they want to explore. And I mean, I'll let you talk about that.
Arthur and I were discussing these things outside of the context of a project. These were conversations we were having, into the late hours of the night, just discussing kind of the implications of the technology and what it meant for society and us as individuals. When we found out about the lab and the opportunity to apply, it was sort of a no-brainer that we wanted to take part. And then bringing on Danielle was also a no-brainer, just given that Danielle brought this element of live performance and exhibitionism that neither Arthur and I had the direct experience in. So that's why we thought that would be she'd be a great addition to our team, and she was. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of the origin of the project.
Fantastic. And here from Sandeep, we actually have specifically, how did you get in touch with CPH docs and CPH lab? So if someone were to have an idea for a project, or is there a window of the application process?
Yeah, absolutely. CPH Lab is a subsidiary of CPH Docs. It's a development program at the Docs Festival to mentor emerging artists and established artists, push the boundaries of documentary film. And it's an annual program, so there's an application every year. That I don't know if it'll change next year, but it was the application was in the end of June this past year. A little impacted by COVID, but it's an annual program, and I highly recommend you apply.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Reed and I were discussing this, and Danielle later joined. But we really didn't approach it with like, oh, let's make a project out of this. It was kind of like something that we've been talking about all the time. And then we just put down whatever was in our heads onto paper, and that somehow became a project. And really CPH Lab helped us develop that idea into a concrete project.
Something
yeah. They were, I mean, so as multidisciplinary as we are, like, we all had different reasons for wanting to make this. And I think Arthur and Reed had a lot of like conceptual driven and like AI focused reasons for being excited to explore this, and medium specific reasons too, like interactive doc, as I mentioned earlier, was super enticing. And then with my background in anthropology and media and live performance, I was interested in what an ephemeral work can look like that's accessible during a pandemic, where my entire line of work of live performance has been totally put on hold. So this was a really interesting way of creating something ephemeral and human-centric, and of the moment, but evolving at the same time. And CPH Docs and the mentors were, or excuse me, CPH Lab as well, and the mentors were so integral in shaping all of our different ambitions and distilling it and rescoping and descoping and rescoping to get to what you saw today. So, I mean, we really wouldn't be here without them. They were an incredible asset to our team.
That's awesome. There's nothing better when you have some idea or concept in your head that you just can't stop thinking about, or riffing off of friends or whatever, and then you find people to support making art about that very thing and dive deeper. So it's really awesome to see the final product, and I know how much work you guys have put in over these past few months, and yeah, it's just really, really brilliant work, guys. Here's another from Donna. Do you have any thoughts on what social and political decisions we need to consider for the future so that AI can be utilized for greater good and not just be exploited for the profit and power of a few?
That's a fantastic question. And it's absolutely something we want to explore and dive deeper into with these branching narratives and these future iterations of the project, to call that out more explicitly. When thinking about stuff that made it into the doc and also some stuff that didn't, consent has been a really, really interesting part of the conversation. Consent and human value. So like I mentioned earlier, who's in the room is such an essential part of improving these algorithms, how they're written, how they run. And one of our interviewees, Regine, had a really great line that is in the film that said, she said something like,
nothing about us without
nothing
us.
about us without us. Exactly. Yeah. That who is in the room is integral, and that algorithms are a reflection of society and what society values. So I think that plays a really big role, and thinking about consent and accessibility is also a really interesting thing. Terms of service, like what you're ticking a box and saying yes to when you don't really understand the implications of the data you're surrendering, and what it's going to continue to be used for. Consent and accessibility play a really big role in creating a more equitable and fair future for people and how they engage with AI and how AI engages with them. So I mean, we want to keep talking to people about it and continue to have that be a narrative thread in the piece, because it's the most critical part, I think, in my view at least, about creating a more optimistic future with artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
100%.
I just want to echo what Haroon said. He's one of our interviewees in Mimic, that we should really sit down and study what are the factors that went into this algorithm, where its known biases, what are the weaknesses of this specific algorithm versus the other. Being able to explore that and really deeply study it, that really needs to happen before it gets launched to broader society and impacts more of us. And also just want to say that if anyone's really interested about this topic, you should definitely go to aiforanyone.org. And that is Haroon founded that organization to educate people about what AI is and what AI can do. And so definitely recommend checking that out.
Awesome. Thank you, Arthur. Yeah, there was another sentiment in the piece of how quickly it's all happening. It's all happening so fast. It's crazy. It's almost overnight. That's why I think projects like this are so important to get into the public discourse, so we could start talking about it and raise awareness and ultimately change some things before it's too late. How do you anticipate the collective portrait will manifest? And that's from Sherry.
I think it goes back to some of the aspirations that we have for future iterations of Mimic. We're not entirely sure what possibilities will be open to us in terms of where we take the project in the future. But I mean, Danielle, do you want to quickly cover some of the stuff we were mentioning before about what we'd like to do?
Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned, we're interested in physical installation, especially as an opportunity to create a collective portrait where people can respond to these, like, where it's still interactive, but in real time, where you're physically engaging with maybe other people in the exhibition or in the installation, and you're also engaging with the interviews you're watching on screen and the questions, like what are the tactile opportunities to create something in a public space. And as Reed mentioned earlier, the branching narratives also creates a really interesting opportunity to have a collective portrait that can become hyper responsive to your inputs and the journey that you take as you engage with Mimic. I think there's like a lot of different ways it can manifest, and with the inputs that we've gotten from this experience and we'll continue to get throughout the festival run, I think a lot of people's answers to these questions that we've asked you, and thank you for being so generous and so open and answering them and taking the time to do it. Those responses, I think, will really inform what feels right for the next iteration of Mimic, and how we see the conversation now that we've expanded it even further, and with anonymity also being a factor.
Fantastic. And one last question, because we're running out of time, from Glenda. I missed this before, but doesn't branching narrative lead to the biasing of viewpoints of the doc? So how have your biases, personal biases, come into play when it comes to putting this project together?
That's a really fantastic question that I don't know that I have a great answer for, because that's not something that we've necessarily thought about. But yes, you're right. If the audience has control over which threads to follow, they might be inclined to stay in their comfort zone and follow what they know. And that's an excellent point. And I would love to continue to talk to you about that, because as we continue to evolve the project, that's something that we're definitely going to want to keep in mind and be aware of, so we can bake that into the experience to prevent that. That's a great point.
Something I'll add too, we talked about this earlier on when we thought about what this project would look like if there was live generation and there were algorithms playing a role in what you were seeing, which is something that would happen with branching narratives. That maybe something like publishing our code and having it annotated so that it's understandable and comprehensible to the users, that's like some kind of end experience that they could have, where they're understanding what connections are being made and why they're being sent down the route that they are. Like, just if we were to do something like this, I think our hope would be to show you a peek of what's happening under the hood, so that at some point in the experience you can engage with the how of this, because I think that goes back to the idea of consent and accessibility. When creating something that has branching narratives or any kind of suggestion model, it's an important way of showing you what's actually going on and opening up a dialogue about it.
100%. It makes me think of, if you were to have an algorithm in the doc that would, instead of giving people the narrative that they would feel most comfortable with, it's something that would actually shake things up. I think a lot of the algorithms that we experience today, whether it's the YouTube algorithm to keep us going down a rabbit hole, or on the Twitterverse keeping us in an echo chamber, or to keep us on longer. And it would be interesting to have an iteration of that in the documentary, to have it actually shake people's perspectives up a little bit. So that's awesome. Thank you guys so much for doing this Q&A and for the film. It was a really lovely experience and super insightful.
Thank you, Jake, for moderating, and thank you everybody who attended, everyone who participated. We're just so grateful for the lab, for the audience, for everybody, and to have had this opportunity to make Mimic and collaborate with all these wonderful people and talk to all of these wonderful people. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And again, for anyone who joined a little late, Jake Olson is also our composer. It's an original score by him, and he is also an interviewee. So Jake, thank you for all of your generosity with this project, and everyone else, thank you for participating. It really means the world to us, and we're thrilled to have you here.
And just thanks again to the lab.
Yes, thank you to CPH Docs, everybody. Thank you.
Amazing. Congrats, guys.
Thanks. All right, take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.